Hi, I'm Lisa Fletcher, and you're in the stream. Today, they are outcasts, living in isolated slums outside Yemen cities. We examine the plight of dark-skinned Yemenis who are called al-akhdam, or servants. Our digital producer, Malika Bilal, is fielding your live interaction from all directions, so tweet her and use the hashtag AJStream. Malika, this topic really underreported. Many people don't even know who this Yemeni minority is, let alone their plight. How's our community weighing in?
It's definitely sparked a conversation with people discussing points back and forth, and one of those points is on how they're referenced, the name, and that's referenced in this video comment here.
Hi, I'm Ibrahim Muthanna from Yemen. When I speak about the marginalized, or as they are called, akhdam, actually one of the problems lies in the term itself, because they're not akhdam or servants as the word imply, but they have been systematically marginalized in the past decades. Now, after an uprising, it's really an ethical obligation to make sure that not only they get their own rights, but also to help them catch up with the rest of the society. Thank you.
Well, of course, we want to hear from all of you at home, whether you're in Yemen or anywhere else. Send us your questions and your comments using the hashtag AJStream.
And of course, to our viewers' point, we are going to be referring to this group of people as muhammashin, not al-akhdam, because al-akhdam is rather derogatory.
Exactly.
To Malika's right is Tom Finn. He is a journalist and former editor of the Yemen Times. Tom was in Yemen between 2010 and 2012, where he witnessed the uprising and the protests in Change Square. He actually reported for Al Jazeera on a number of occasions. Tom, we are so glad to have you here on the stream.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Of course, there are many ways that your comments and questions can be in the stream. One way is to record a video comment. Go to stream.aljazeera.com. On the right-hand side, you'll see a section called Your Voice. Click that red Record Your Comment button. And in 3 very easy steps, you can send us your thoughts. You can also record an I'm in the stream video, just like this one.
Hi, I'm Victoria. I'm a geopolitical risk management analyst, and I'm in the stream.
Distinguished by their dark skin, they're outcasts in Yemen, living in isolated communities. During the day, they're street sweepers, and at night, they return to their small huts in garbage-filled slums where basic necessities are nowhere to be found. Most Yemenis call them akhdam, as we mentioned, meaning servants, but they prefer to be referred to as muhammashin, meaning marginalized ones. In English, they're often referred to as the untouchables. That's a term referring to a minority group that's been ostracized by their own society, segregated from the mainstream by social customs and even legal mandates. Take a look at the following clip. It's from an upcoming documentary by Yemeni filmmaker Nawal al-Maghafi titled The Forgotten Souls.
نوقف بس السكة شقي حوالي ساعة ساعتين لو خرجنا من الساعة 7 نركب الساعة 9 لازم محضنا لو حصلنا سيارة ما حصلنا سيارة ما نرضى حد يركب احنا نمشي ماشي لهذاك المكان محل ما نشتغل نوصل نستناها لحتى يصلوا صلاة التراويح وبعدين لو هنشقرق يوزنوا لحنا الكراتين والحاجات هذه ما هنش على قول الناس لهن الطافة لأنهم الناس ما شاء الله معاهم عشوا نفوسهم يأكلوا أولادهم يقول احنا نستنوا لبكرة نروح مكسورين الخاطر ما بيكونوا الأطفال مستنين نروح لهن بعشاء نروح لهن بحاجة يفرحوا فيها نروح يدونا فاضية ولا في أي شيء.
Many of Yemen's marginalized ones joined the wave of Arab Spring protests at Change Square, hoping that the uprising would bring them a better life. They were welcomed in the protests, as there are nearly 1.5 million of them living inside the country. But changes that took place in Yemen have not had any effect on these people's lives. Their calls at Change Square have yet to be answered. So why are Yemen's untouchables a caste living at society's lowest social order, and how long are they going to face this hardship? To help us answer these questions, we are joined via Skype from London by Nawal al-Maghafi, a Yemeni filmmaker currently finishing a documentary on Yemen's untouchables. And from Sana'a, Yemen, we are joined by Atiaf al-Wazir, blogger and co-founder of the Support Yemen media campaign. And on the phone from Sana'a is Sarah Jamal Ahmed, sociologist, activist, and self-described feminist. She's also a co-founder of Support Yemen. I want to thank you all for joining us today. Nawal, I want to start with you. How did this all happen? How did Yemen get to a place where it's socially acceptable to subject 1.5 million people to serious persecution and even violence?
I think it's also really important to remember that Yemen has a high number of there's a lack of education in Yemen, and I think this is the source of the problem. During the time that I spent with these people, they're very uneducated, and it's also that they have very low self-esteem as well, that they're finding it very hard to integrate into society. So the problem isn't just from the Yemeni people or from mainstream society, but it's from them also. But I think it's very important that I think education is, what's going to solve this issue.
Atiaf, is it as simple as a lack of education, though? Because in a society where there is not a lot of education, you still have to assume that there are people who are educated, police officers, doctors, people in the government. Why aren't these people leading the charge to turn things around?
I mean, of course, lack of education is key. But I think it's a lot more than that. Yemen's history has created a sort of caste-like system because of the social strata within society. And it's not necessarily based on income as in other countries, but rather based on lineage and based on profession. And if we look at the Muhammashin, we'll see that in terms of lineage, this is a major problem for many people, because the perception that many Yemenis have is that these people are foreigners. They're not Yemeni, they came from Africa, and therefore they're foreign to us, their customs are foreign, even though they've been here for thousands of years. And they themselves think of themselves as Yemenis, as they are Yemeni, and it creates an identity crisis. And of course the economic factor comes into play. Their jobs are mostly reserved for, cleaning the streets, and that fuels this sort of stigma and creates many myths, such as, they are dirty people. There are plenty of myths that people in Yemen, unfortunately, have about this society. So I think it's a number of things. Of course, poverty is a major component of this, and the term that was mentioned earlier, the Muhammashin, now is the one commonly used. But a lot of the leaders within the Muhammashin also prefer another term, which is the most impoverished group, because they see poverty as a major obstacle in this. And again, of course, education, because a lot of them work in the streets, a lot of the children work, and there's a very high dropout rate, which means they are unable to get other professions due to discrimination, lack of education, and it's just a cycle.
Well, people in our community are also picking up on the fact that this is something that's echoed in other places in the world. Mikey says, are black Yemenis like the Dalits in India and the Jim Crow blacks in America? Naslihan says, Yemen's dark-skinned population are treated like the slum dwellers of India and Brazil. And DJ Amaluddin says, is it a Yemeni problem, or is it a problem across corrupt Eastern regimes? This person says, Pakistan has the same problem. Tom, I want you to listen to this video question because it picks up on something that Atiaf said on those same lines about lineage.
Understand that Yemen is considered to be the origins of Arabs. And coming from a tribal society, it has embedded this culture of everyone knows their background, everyone knows their roots, their ancestors' history, whether it's hundreds of thousands of years ago. And so when you compare this to this minority, al-akhdam, you see that their roots and originations are very blurred and identified with, which unfortunately has led them to be classified as second-class citizens.
So Safia says there's a blurred history, but that's what's at the root of this is debating who the Muhammashin are.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. Well, I mean, we should remember the revolution of 1962 in Yemen formally abolished ancient status categories, but the Muhammashin have retained this kind of stigma that we've been talking about today. I mean, I spent best part of 2 years living in Yemen, and I have to say this is one of those topics that people just really don't want to talk about. Essentially, we're talking about a group of people in society who have lived in the country for over 1,000 years, but purely because of the way their faces look or the color of their skin are treated in a kind of second-class citizens. So what you have is these kind of like rumors that are perpetuated. For example, I've heard Yemenis tell me that they think that the men, are not honest or not fit for proper work, or that the women are promiscuous. There's even a Yemeni proverb which says that if a dog licks your plate, you should clean it, but if someone from the Muhammashin touches it, you should smash it. We're talking about very deeply ingrained prejudice here, and the only way that we can actually think about changing that, as what we've seen in the Arab Spring, when these people assert themselves, take to the streets alongside Yemenis and start protesting and calling for a more equal society. And that's something that we have actually seen in the last year, which I think is a promising sign.
And I want to get to that a little later in the show. But Serge Mal Ahmed, coming to us from Sana'a, You know, Tom mentioned that they're treated as second-class citizens, but it seems like it may be even worse than that. Can you enlighten us a bit? Talk about the kinds of things that these people are subjected to.
First of all, as Atyaf mentioned, we are not a class-based society. We're a caste-based society. We inherit the caste, so it doesn't matter if you become wealthier later. You have to inherit your caste. And again, to connect what Tom said, what happened in 1962 was not a revolution, was not a popular revolution as much as of a military movement, and this is why what changed was the form of ruling. It became a republic after it was a monarchy, but the society did not really change. The caste remained the same, and you can see the prejudice practices very clear on different levels. If we talk about for example, the wages and the way those cleaners are treated, they're treated in a very illegal way. Most of them are not registered. Minors, sometimes under the age of 10, actually working cleaning the streets, double shifts, 12 hours a day. They work at late hours at night without fair wages. They don't have a retirement system. They don't have any health insurance, in spite of the fact that they clean in hospitals. They work with, sometimes they work in the cancer hospital where they have, where they're exposed to the most dangerous kind of trash in the country, but they're not included in any kind of medical insurance. This is on one hand. On the other hand, the society still refuses marriages from this caste. If a girl from outside this caste wants to get married to a man from al-Muhammashin or the Yemeni servants, between quotations, her family would rather kill her rather than marry a man from that caste, and vice versa.
Noel, I want to jump over to Noel for a second, and I want to mention, by the way, all of these images that we're seeing, the video, these are from Noel's upcoming documentary. Noel, thank you so much for sharing those. You lived with these people for about 3 weeks in these slums. Talk about it. Talk about the level of violence and other things that you saw while you were there.
Well, I firstly started by spending time in the slums of Sana'a, and you know, like Atyaf and Sarah and Tom have mentioned, there's a lot of racism that they're subjected to. They are the cleaners of the streets in Yemen. And whilst women in Yemen are generally not found to be working at night, the women of the Muhammashin, they sweep the streets, you know, from 5 a.m. till the morning. One of the most horrific things I saw in Sana'a was a young girl, she was 15, who was giving labor and wouldn't be allowed into a public hospital. So she had to go back to her home and, you know, give birth by herself. But I also found that now with the extreme poverty in Yemen, because Yemen is the poorest state in the Middle East, and also with 50% poverty, some Yemenis have integrated into these slums. So when I went to Hodeidah, I found that there's actually Yemeni families that are living in the same situation that have been labeled Muhammashin also. So it's actually broader than it used to be before. It's not just the ones that are from Ethiopian descendants from 1500 years ago. So it's becoming a broader label.
Well, Atyaf, you mentioned earlier the part of this problem is the economic situation. And left on our Facebook page from Hamdan says, this issue is in the heart of so many social problems and challenges facing Yemenis today. Of course, we also have a tweet from Muhammad Ali who says, racial divides and discrimination often form the foundation for economic inequality. Can you talk about some of that economic inequality, job security, payments for sweeping the streets? It can't be much.
Of course, and I think this is a key in discussing this issue. Discrimination starts at an early age. So when kids go to school, unfortunately, they face also that discrimination by their teachers and by their peers. And therefore, there's a very high dropout rate. And when you leave school, at the fourth grade level because you cannot continue, there are very few jobs available for you. Even some that have graduated. I know one lawyer who just graduated from law school and is trying to find a job, and he's facing a lot of discrimination discrimination because people don't want to hire him. And in that case, they're only left with certain types of menial jobs, such as street cleaning, and no other, or very few other opportunities in other types of jobs, even the ones that have gotten the education and have the skills to do that. And hence they continue to live in this cycle of discrimination. A lot of the street cleaners get very minimum wages. They, like Sara said, they don't have contracts by the government, and this is what led to the mass protests by the street cleaners
Atiaf,
in the past year. They've been actually going on for past couple of years.
Atiaf, I actually want to pick up on that point. The fact that the Muhammadin have not been quiet. You know, they've been trying to bring some attention to their plight. As you mentioned, they have actually gone on strike a number of times, demanding better job security and better working conditions. I want all our viewers to have a chance to take a look at this report from Al Saida TV, which, unlike the state-sponsored television in Yemen, does report on the struggles of these folks.
نناشد الأخ رئيس الجمهورية بتثبيتنا كوننا موظفين لنا أكثر من 10 أو 15 سنة بالأجر اليومي، ومن ما جاء من مسؤول ثاني تمام يجي يهدد العمال أو يهدد الموظفين، يعني أي غلطة تمام، أي غلطة تمام، غلطة صغيرة تمام يرفع بالفصل، وقد ناضل أكثر من 10 أو 15 سنة.
Okay, Tom, what effect has this had?
Well, I mean, I think, as you said, what we saw this year with the Arab Spring protests was that the al-akhdam, or the Muhammadin as we should call them, were dragged into the public sphere for what perhaps is the first time. Before they were street cleaners, they lived in slums, they were people of the night, and suddenly they're marching alongside Yemenis. They're inside Change Square. They're pitching their tents up. They're calling for an end to the regime. You know, even members of this group were actually shot and killed during the crackdown on protesters.
Did this newfound boldness come as a result of the Arab Spring, you think?
Well, I think what it offered was a chance for minority groups, and we're not just talking about Muhammadin, but also women here, to assert themselves and to actually take front stage. I witnessed when I was in Change Square, a man named Nabil from the Muhammadin who took to the stage. He was the first man to ever step foot on the stage after 9 months of protests, and he challenged the Yemenis in front of him, and he said, look, I'm an Arab, I'm a Muslim, I'm a Yemeni like you. I came to this square searching for equality, and all I find is discrimination. You know, we also want something out of this, and this is not just about changing the president or toppling the regime. We're looking for a change, a deep-seated change in society. And I would add to that we saw the Muhammadin adopting some of the languages and techniques of the Arab Spring. So there was this huge strike that happened in March. Every street cleaner in Yemen went on strike pretty much, and after 3 days the capital city was swimming waist high in garbage, and the government eventually caved in. It gave them an increase in salary, and it promised to give them permanent contracts. So I'm not for a second saying here that everything's, you know, solved, but there are glimmers of hope, and we see people now asserting themselves on the streets and you know, really calling for attention, saying, look, we're here too, and we're part of this, you know, we're part of this movement.
Benjamin on Twitter is picking up on that glimmer of hope. He says, having spent a lot of time with the Muhammadin, I'm really amazed by their desire for change, by their motivation to change. No pity. And on Facebook, Mikey likens this to the civil rights movement in the US and says some 50 years after the whole civil rights movement, we're still trying to erase the racial hate in this country. And Sarah, I want you to pick up on that with this video comment along the same lines.
Evening, my name is Saqib from the UK. I worked in the Yemen as a teacher for almost 3 years, so my question is on whether education might be the key to emancipate the blacks in Yemen, comparing their plight with the African Americans that had an access to an education and produced the likes of Frederick Douglass, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King. Maybe if the blacks in Yemen were given this opportunity, it might expedite their emancipation through self-realization.
Sarah, is education the key?
Of course, I strongly agree with our friend here in the video. And I would like to set an example that is closer to us from the U.S. The South Yemens experience dealing with outcasts between 1964 and 1990. The Yemeni Socialist Party had this policy to integrate the socio-caste within the education system. They actually forced the families of the outcasts to send their children to school, and they provided them with free education. And the result that the second and the third generation of this caste was out there. I mean, there were judges, there were military leaders, teachers, television anchors that we can see working until now. But after 1994, after the Civil War, Saleh completely ignored empowering this caste, because it wasn't in his favor to empower this caste, because he was not for social justice. Simply, he started neglecting everybody, and as a result, they were the most neglected.
Okay, so Atiaf, if Yemen doesn't have a history of inclusiveness, how do you now create a foundation for people to see and act differently toward a group that has been marginalized for centuries?
I mean, I think there are three ways, but one that I want to highlight is an example that's happening right now in Sana'a. There's an NGO called Amir and Uqbi, and they've been operating since 1997, and they were created by the Muhammashin and serve the Muhammashin in the area here. And their community there's a strike difference between their community and other communities, and they could be used as a pilot project. Their main idea is that education is the key. Education is the way to change. So they're trying to promote their young people to stay in school by doing peer-to-peer programs. They go to the school, they talk to the teachers, they encourage them to stay, they give them incentives to stay. Every time someone finishes school, they have a celebration, a play, they do weekly events and awareness raising, and they have seen a big difference in their own community in terms of the level of education, the willingness of people to stay in school, and the community's effort, the collective effort in their community to change from within. They've changed their slum area, they've painted it, they've made it, they've fundraised together, and I think that community is really an empowering community and a community that can be an example for other people. But this is something that needs to be assisted by local civil society. They've complained a lot that a lot of the people use them in the sense that they write their names in donor proposal and proposals for donors, and nothing gets trickled down to them. There also needs to be a political will. The government needs to make this a national priority, because it is a national priority.
Yeah,
we need to have laws regulating equality and anti-discrimination.
Atiaf, I'm going to stop you right there. Tom, we've got about 30 seconds left. You can pick up on that. Government making this a priority. How are things going to turn around?
Right, that's what I was going to say. I mean, at the moment, there's no law in Yemen which says that if you're a member of the Muhammashin, you can't get a job or you can't marry. The problem is that the government is not actually being proactive. There needs to be some affirmative action policy. This is what we saw in India when it came to trying to empower the untouchable caste there. You know, at the moment, these people are invisible. They don't have a voice. There's no leader. There's no one talking in the government on their behalf. So you need to actually take them and put them in the public eye. They're not on the news. They're not anywhere at the moment.
We're going to hold that thought and continue this discussion in our online post show. But before that, Malika has another story that we're following.
A new initiative is drawing attention to the covert U.S. drone program, one tweet at a time. @DroneStream tracks more than a decade's worth of reported drone strikes from the first known targeted killing in Yemen in 2002. In just over 48 hours, @DroneStream was up to 152 tweets and nearly 10,000 followers, and the tweets are still coming. The most recent tweet only goes up to 2010. May 21st. 4 children, including Fatima, Nisar, and Naeem Khan, were killed when a drone hit Muhammad Khel, Pakistan. Well, earlier we spoke to Josh Begley, the graduate student behind the account.
I guess the central question that I'm thinking about with this is really a question about access and information. And the question is really, even if we have access to the data about drone strikes, do we really want to be interrupted by it? Do we really want a Twitter feed that's going to show up in all of our other communication to sort of annoy us with this very heavy data?
Online, the sentiment seems to be that efforts like DroneStream are necessary. Americans, it's your civic duty to follow DroneStream, tweets Tommy, and Laura says, the DroneStream is chilling, an effective use of Twitter, but stomach-turning nonetheless. Well, you can see more of DroneStream and our full interview with Josh at stream.aljazeera.com. Lisa?
All right, stay with us. The post show is next. So if you're near a computer, log on to stream.aljazeera.com and join us for the rest of the discussion, which is going to start in about 30 seconds. Welcome back to the Stream's online post show. We're talking about the plight of 1.5 million Yemenis who are so marginalized that they live in slums and they're ostracized from regular Yemeni society. And one of the horrible things that these people face, particularly the women, is violence. These people have little to no legal right within their country. Many of the women are really easy targets for rape. And because there aren't laws specifically protecting them and they don't have money to afford lawyers, crimes against them often go unpunished. I want to take a look at a clip that we've got from an NGO called Witness. They put together a short documentary highlighting the struggles specifically of these marginalized Yemeni women.
أول مرة أول البداية قالوا لي 2 شباب بعدين جالس مستقيم قدام المغرب يعني بالباب بعدين حامل بالبنت اللي فلت لي من داخلي بعدها هو قال لي اشتري خطة بيك وهذه اشتري خطة بعيك وليش يكون خبركم ثاني قلت لوني يعني احنا مانيش حق الخبر هذا لو كنا حق الخبر هذا فتن احنا هنا وهيك بعدها قال لي خلاص قال زوجك ما هنلوش هدية وهذا 500 عليك قلت له ماشي 500 خليه يروح بعده كذا ها الشال يعطفنيها ويخبطني بحجري وانا بالظهر بعدين انا قمت بكي وهذا وفكر اذا حقي ذا ها وعور ما هذا حقي اختك.
Atiaf, I want to go to you out of that. Talk a little bit about your experience with women there who have been the targets of rape and violence.
Because a lot of these women work either really early or really late, many of them are subjected to harassment or rape. One woman in particular, for example, was pregnant and was attacked. And when she went to court, instead of getting justice, she was fired from her job. And because she doesn't have a contract, she was working on a daily rate. That was it. That was it for her. There was no means to seek any justice. And in fact, her father was also fired from his job. And that is just exemplifies what many of the women and the men face in that society, and it's very difficult for them to seek justice because of their situation and also because of the financial means. They cannot afford lawyers. And of course their children also face the same fate, because many of them, when they go to the streets, they're also with these children, and they're faced they see what's happening to their mothers, and they're subjected to it, and a lot of the young girls have faced harassment, and there's no means, again, no way to talk about it. It's a shameful act, and they feel inside that it's something that they're ashamed of. So it's something that really should be discussed and should be taken on by many of the NGOs in Yemen as a major problem facing women.
Nawal, you lived in one of the Muhammadin communities for 3 weeks. I'm sure you have no shortage of similar stories of these women's plight.
Sorry, I just want to clarify one thing. I didn't stay in the slums with the Muhammadin. What they're living, the situation they're living in is very, very horrific. We're talking about around 15 people in a room, 3 meters by 2 meters. They take it in turns to sleep. They have no toilet. They have no basic living, they have no basic homes, basically. But the question that I kept asking and that I wanted to clarify in the film is, what is the difference between, one of the Muhammadin women and just a normal Yemeni woman in Yemen? Would a normal Yemeni woman in Yemen not be ashamed if she was raped, for example? That's one of the main arguments that I wanted to put forward in this program.
Did you talk to average Yemeni women and pose that question?
Yes, that's one of the things I did in the film. The film follows a family that's not from the, I went to Sana'a and I stayed with the Muhammadin, and then I went to Hodeidah and followed a Yemeni family from the al-Faqih family, which is a very popular surname in Yemen. So they're not from the al-akhdam caste, from the Muhammadin caste, sorry. And they're living in exactly the same situation, and they're being marginalized just as much. So what is the difference? Isn't it an economic factor or an education factor? Like, is it just because where they're descendants from, or is there a bigger story to it?
Well, there's something, a tweet here that I'd like you to pick up on, Tom. JAB says she wants to push back on the gentleman in our video comment that said Black Yemenis are voiceless, when clearly the community is making strides. And of course, you'd mentioned earlier that there are glimmers of hope. But on the other hand, across Yemen society in general, Abu Bakr says the Muhammadin are discriminated against, but there's also something more serious eating at them. the drones. And then another tweet here from Mohammed who says, there's more than 10 million people in Yemen suffering from poverty, so it's not only those 1.5 million quote-unquote untouchables. So let's talk about the problems facing Yemenis in general,
Sure,
the drone strikes, the poverty, lack of water.
I think it's a really important point, and you know, we are talking about one group that are living in awful conditions, but actually even before the uprising in Yemen, it was the poorest country in the Middle East. 56% of Yemeni children are chronically malnourished. That's the highest rate of malnutrition in the world after Afghanistan. And actually one result of the uprising was that food prices increased. And now we're looking, I mean, I met many Yemeni families who are spending half of their monthly income on bread alone. So what we're talking about here is a group who are at the bottom of an incredibly poor country. And how you set about empowering them and encouraging social mobility is obviously incredibly difficult. Another thing, I don't know whether we could pick up on this, but clearly to some extent this kind of racism is internalized. And you know, there are people in the machine who are asserting themselves, taking to the streets and protesting, but there are also some people who have just lost hope. You know, you're brought up as a child, you're told you're not supposed to go to school, the only job you can get is to sweep the streets. So it's like, how do you help someone like that who's internalized that kind of racism, you know, without being condescending, without being patronizing? That's the real difficulty here. And it's a perpetuating cycle, right? So you grow up in that kind of society, and then you teach your child that that's the expectations that society has of them too. So
Sarah, pick up on Tom's point. How do you overcome that when people have internalized the racism to a point where they've essentially given up hope?
Well, first of all, I mean, yes, everybody is poor, but if you're poor and you're from a different caste and you work hard, you can move to a different socio class or a socio status. But if you're from this caste, there's no hope for you. It doesn't matter how much education you get or how much money you make. I think the problem is in the current political tribal system. The power of the current system is within racism. Not only racism against this caste, but racism against all other castes. The power of Saleh's regime that is still continuing until now, the secret of this power is in this discrimination against women, against this caste, and then against other castes within the society, so that he or his system or his regime can continue the whole divide and conquer policy. Their status is not going to improve without the help of a real political decision that protects this caste and not copy, but at least work on the experience in South Yemen before to integrate them within the educational system. National dialogue is an example. They weren't given any seats, they weren't even mentioned, alongside with the Jews and alongside with women who were also marginalized in a special way.
I mean, Sarah's just hit the nail on the head. I mean, essentially what you have in Yemen is a system that is based on divide and rule. So, I mean, this group has been used countless times by the president as a political tool. You know, he'll pay them some money to come out and cheer for him or to vote for him in the elections. And while there has been a transfer of power in Yemen this year, the president stepped down, his deputy is now in power. Essentially, that whole culture of corruption and racism is still in place. So when we talk about the Arab Spring, you know, are we talking about a political change here, or we're talking about a social change? And I think Sarah's completely right that as long as we have that kind of system in Yemen, which basically ascribes to people what they're capable of based purely on where they're from or what they look like, then these kind of problems are going to continue.
All right. Tom, Nawal, Atiaf, and Sarah, I want to thank you all for being a part of today's show. On Monday, we're going to talk about the battle between remix culture and copyright law. We're going to speak to Creative Commons founder Lawrence Lessig. So tweet us your questions and your comments for him. I'm sure you've got some. And until then, we'll see you online.